We might have heard of wars in history that lasted for days, months, years, and sometimes decades, just like the Afghan War of this millennia. But there was a war in history between two imperial powers in East Africa that lasted for not even an hour. The Zanzibar War of 1896 was the shortest war of all time and lasted only 38 minutes. Yes, you heard that right, only 38 minutes. The war was between Prince Khalid of Zanzibar and the British Empire, but the actual fight was between Germany and the British to secure lands in East Africa and exercise power. The origin of this war can be traced back to Berlin, where the Berlin Conference of 1884–85 was held a decade earlier. The purpose of this conference was to solidify European claims to African land. While German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck initially had little interest in a distant empire since he was more concerned with the balance of power in Europe, he also believed Germany should not be left out of growing its influence. Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, Britain had been a long-standing friend of Prussia, hoping to make a common cause with a unified Germany. Britain expanded its influence over East Africa in general and Zanzibar in the late 19th century. Said ibn Sultan enhanced Zanzibar's regional possessions and worldwide economic prominence in the first half of the century. His successor Bargash was obliged to yield to European forces and divide his kingdom between the British and the Germans. The same was followed by the subsequent sultans. The signing of the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty established zones of influence for the two East African countries. By 1890, Britain had persuaded the Sultanate to transfer its mainland lands to Germany while retaining control of the island as a protectorate of the British Empire. Britain agreed to keep the Sultanate as an institution, but underlined that the Sultan's power was only nominal. Even though the Sultan of Zanzibar claimed to dominate the island and the mainland area, the two powers did this. When Germany was awarded the country east of Lake Tanganyika, the British Empire became the defenders of Zanzibar. As Britain became Zanzibar's protector, it set two major policy objectives: the elimination of slavery and the restoration of the island's powerful merchant economy. Consul General Gerald Portal's economic strategy enraged Zanzibari businessmen. Still, the stance on slavery angered them the most, as spice estates rose in value during the 19th century. Sayyid Ali ibn Saud opposed Britain's commands until he died in 1893, and when the time came to appoint his successor, Britain wanted the future sultan to be more subservient to British Empire. So they chose Hamad ibn Thuwain to take the throne of Zanzibar. In response, a rebellious Prince Khalid ibn Bargash invaded the palace. He based his claim on being the late Bargash's only son and that he was neglected after Bargash's death. But the Zanzibari succession laws did not make the sultan hereditary. The British persuaded Khalid to step aside, making Ahmad the undisputed sultan. Ahmad was appointed sultan in 1893, and things ran well for 3 years until his untimely death. Although Ahmad initially agreed by 1896, he had grown resentful of British administration and had formed a 1,000-man military force loyal exclusively to him. On August 25th that year, Ahmad died, igniting yet another succession battle. Senior British diplomat Arthur Hardinge wanted Hamoud ibn Muhammad to take the throne because he thought he would be a pliable sultan who won't be against eradicating slavery. This was communicated to Hardinge's deputy, Basil Cave. Prince Khalid, who had been overlooked following Ali's and Hamad's death, was determined this time. He called himself Sultan of Zanzibar and took control of the palace and harem. He was believed to be poisoned by his cousin Khalid bin Bargash. who then marched into the palace and almost immediately claimed the Zanzibar throne. Bargash believed he might declare his independence from the British Empire. While this history may resemble that of other individuals who dared to challenge the British, Bargash was not Mahatma Gandhi or William Wallace. He was a self-proclaimed sultan who supported the profitable slave trade that the British had fought to outlaw. Bargash's interests were at odds with that approach, and he probably thought the British would back off. British diplomats were quite unhappy with this turn of events, and Basil Cave, the area's top diplomat, tried to convince Khalid to step down. Khalid, who began assembling his troops close to the palace, unheeded these warnings. Khalid's army was ready with weapons and cannons that were diplomatic gifts that had been sent to the previous sultans throughout the years. His army was impressively well armed. By the evening of August 25th, Khalid had his palace guarded by about 3,000 troops, several artillery pieces, and even a royal yacht that was only lightly armed in the adjacent harbor. On the other hand, the HMS Philomel and the HMS Rush, two British cruisers, were already stationed in the harbor. Troops were being rushed ashore to guard the British consulate and prevent riots among the local populace. Cave had also asked for help from the HMS Sparrow, a neighboring British ship that had just reached the harbor on the evening of August 25th. Although Cave had a sizable armed force in the harbor, he knew he lacked the power to initiate combat without orders from the British government. He sent a telegraph that evening to the Foreign Office instructing them to launch an attack on the palace if no diplomatic solution could be reached. Cave continued to give Khalid ultimatums as he awaited a response from London, but to no avail. The following day, two additional British warships, the HMS Raccoon and the HMS St. George, entered the harbor with Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, the British fleet commander. Late night, Cave received a telegram permitting him to take whatever action required to remove Khalid from the palace. On August 26, Khalid's last request was sent to vacate the palace by the following morning at 9 a.m. Cave also requested that all non-military boats leave the harbor that evening to prepare for war. 1 hour before the deadline at 8 a.m. the following morning, Khalid replied to Cave, denying the evacuation of the palace. The British soldiers began firing. When he declined, the British artillery started to bomb the palace at 9 a.m. The results were obvious. Khalid and his soldiers did their best to endure the British barrage. Bargash's artillery was wiped out in a matter of minutes. The Royal Navy also shelled Khalid's fine vessel Glasgow, which Queen Victoria had given to the Sultan. It was immediately sunk since it was undoubtedly no match for contemporary battleships. HMS St. George rescued the crew of Glasgow. Bargash's committed warriors left the palace after only 38 minutes, demonstrating that they weren't at all that committed. The fight was concluded when the Sultan's banner was taken down. One British sailor was injured during the shortest war in history, whereas the pro-Bargash troops lost about 500 soldiers. It is believed that he and a small group of his followers might have left soon after the bombardment started to the German consulate for political asylum. He was brought to Germany under cover. When British soldiers took control of Dar es Salaam, Khalid was captured. Before returning to East Africa in 1916, he was deported to the first Seychelles and then to St. Helena. In 1927, Khalid died in Mombasa. This was the history of the Zanzibar War, the shortest war ever. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, check out other historical videos on our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you don't miss out on such interesting topics.